Welcome to AUA Leadership in Business, an official podcast of the American Urological Association.
Welcome to the AUA Leadership in Business podcast, where urologic professionals experience the practical application of business acumen essential to successfully navigate today's rapidly changing business environment. I am Dr. Micheal Darson, and in today's episode, we will be discussing why and how your network is your net worth. Joining me today for this discussion is Dr. Jennifer Miles Thomas. Dr. Miles Thomas is a diplomat of the American Board of Urology and board certified in female pelvic medicine and reconstructive surgery. She provides specialized care in female reconstructive surgery, pelvic prolapse, incontinence, complicated urinary disorders, and disorders of the urinary system due to neurologic disease. She is currently the CEO and president of Urology of Virginia and the medical director of the Pelvic Health Program at Chesapeake Regional Healthcare. Dr. Miles Thomas, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Dr. Darson. Thank you very much for the invitation. And this is, I really appreciate the topic because this is something that's very important and difficult for some of us.
Absolutely. And I was going to, at some point during this podcast, interject my own weakness in this area. So we're going to have a lot of fun discovering. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and jump in. To start us off, could you please share any of your personal experiences or observations related to networking and why you think this is an important topic?
Yes, definitely. I'm going to be completely transparent on this podcast today. Well, I did not like networking. Why? Because I thought it was scammy. I thought it was, I thought it wasn't truthful. It wasn't honest. It felt like work to have small talk with people that I didn't know. I also felt like I had better things to do. A lot of us are very like type A, and we have a long list of things we need to accomplish. And sometimes networking and just the term seems that it's not completely social, but that there weren't a lot of advantages. There weren't a lot of positives. A lot of times we come in with a bias too that, I mean, we always think like we're the most interesting person. So it's always that some other people that were going to be there, they weren't going to be as interesting. As I matured as a person, I learned that I'm a participant in creating the better conversation. That a lot of times during networking, people transitioned from talking about things that I thought were boring or not as applicable to me to more about ideas. And the entire situation became a lot more engaging. I felt there were more personal connections that were made. But then you also, as you go through your journey in life, realize that the more you're able to network, the more you're able to expand your reach, your circle of influence. And then the more you're able to give back to others as you bring them into your network, and now they're part of a larger ecosystem. So I would say that this learning to network is crucial, not just for professional development, but for personal development. You really have to recognize that this world is a give and take, and you have to learn to be interested in others as more than you are interested in yourself. What were your thoughts about networking?
Well, great comments there. And I would say that, you know, obviously people have different personalities, right? So they're going to be starting from a different starting block than others that may be more social. I personally kind of felt like I was a little bit more on the quieter side. And so it took effort for me to go not only to the meetings, but to get into these discussions. And that's, I guess, the advice I would give anybody who kind of thinks they're more of a wallflower is, you know, get out there and just make the effort to get involved in a conversation. And as you pointed out, it's going to benefit you professionally and personally because you're going to be, you know, doing things maybe a little bit out of your comfort zone. And that's always adds for, you know, it leads to personal and professional development.
I agree. I think a lot of us, we put up those barriers to provide ourselves like this shell of personal comfort. But once you get out of it, you realize the risk that you thought it was going to be isn't there. Like, you're not going to be morally injured by putting yourself out there and having conversations with people you didn't know anything about. And it's 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 reassuring to know that it's still safe.
Yeah, I would also agree. I went from kind of avoiding those situations earlier in my career to now I like seeking them out, because I have found that you surround yourself by really smart, personable people, and you're going to learn. And it's just it's a good situation.
I completely agree.
All right, let's start by unpacking the idea of networking. What is the optimal method for deconstructing the concept of networking, comprehending its essence, and recognizing its significance?
Yeah. So what I would do is I'd go all the way back to our early years. When I say the early years, I mean childhood. So what is like networking itself? Well, technically, the definition is going to be the action or process of interacting with others to exchange information and develop personal or social context. But we start doing that when we're kids, right? We literally go outside to play. If there's a new person or you're the new person, there is no barrier. You run up to someone and say, "Hey, can I play? Can I borrow your ball?" And there's not that same kind of fear that we develop later in life. Same thing when we are moving to a new neighborhood. Um, Outside of school, like, we have new neighbors, we socialize with them. Then we, especially physicians, we kind of pigeonhole ourselves into certain environments because after grade school and high school, there's college. We usually hang with the people who are pre-med or in the other STEM classes. It's fairly rare now to find people who are truly like art majors and other creatives, but I think the med schools are looking more and more for diversity in their med schools. So there may be people who are coming there. But these are all like comfortable environments, but still, it's networking the whole time. But then again, we finish med school, we do residency. That's a whole nother network. We start our first jobs. So it's a process that we learn over the years. It's just once we're out and adults, we're calling it networking versus making connections and making friends. And what's important is once we're out, we start understanding the significance of what's called social capital. So that's that's kind of loosely defined as it's a social relationship that brings benefit hopefully to both parties. And it's something that we we learn to develop because now we're becoming professional references for people, not just for jobs, but in life. And you really have to recognize that when you're recommending your friend, your cohort into other situations where they're unknown, you are using your social capital to bring them into that new network in that environment. And this is exactly what people are marketing right now. The whole social influencers on Instagram, etc. They're asking individuals who have social capital to entice others in their ecosystem to buy, read, go, or influence them in some way to have an action. That's the same thing that we're doing and using the people in our network to help move them along to what other needs that they have. I think another thing that's really, really important is to understand that with technology, we have really moved from being just knowledge based to relationship based. And I see it a lot in the younger generations. And I don't want to date myself, but I'm about to. So, like in undergrad, I remember to literally walking to the library, opening up these like card catalogs, flipping through the cards, finding the book, looking on the shelf. And now some people who are listening is like, what is she talking about? But that's what happened, in the 90s. And now anyone can just go on to Google, pull up the exact same information, read the book online. And so that big gap, people are able to access the information. They're not going to come to me just for the information. They're going to come to me for the relationship. and what else we can give. So technology has completely changed that. But what technology hasn't changed, and I don't know that it will change, is the basics of how to get to know people, how to understand and how to make connections. And it's really reinforced the importance of developing that relationship. If we talk about the younger generation, the text generation, people some people have lost the art of conversation. Everything can't be done in 140 characters. Sometimes you have to dig deep and understand why people think a certain way, what their needs are, how to communicate. And I think it's really, really important. So that's really the idea of networking and some of the importance.
So I think you've hit on some really important points that I'd like to kind of go back and reemphasize. The first one is the concept of social capital. And I think that's so important to understand that because, you know, social networking is an interaction and there's an exchange. You know, a lot of times when people say networking, they think, what is it doing for me? But you got to remember that as you develop more experience over time and mature, you have a lot to offer in that exchange as well. So that's a concept that I think, at least early on, people don't really focus on, that it's a real exchange. I mean, there's nothing tangible, but the exchange is what's important, and it's a two-way exchange. And then the other one is the art of conversation. Oh man, I'll tell you, I'm smiling here because you encounter people of all ages that have lost the ability to really have a good conversation. And it's such a basic tool that's so important just from a social standpoint. You know, as human beings, we're social animals, and being able to hold a conversation, I mean, you're already ahead of many of your peers if you can simply do that.
I completely agree. And I think that as the world changes, and potentially people are more isolated, it's going to be more and more challenging to develop that skill set. But I think it is part of our job to maintain it and continue to teach just the art of conversation.
Right. And I think that, residency programs are a great place to reinforce that importance. You know, I know that residents are asked every day to present and do things in a very science-oriented fashion, but encouraging them at meetings to go out and talk to residents from other programs, staff, practitioners in private practice. It's a great way to take advantage of a really good infrastructure that is urology to begin with. So, I think that's important to try to take advantage of because it's already there.
I agree. And I feel also that many residency programs have recognized this, and especially the intern year and once you're actually in urology residency, they've really focused on developing more social activities so that people bond in different ways outside of work. And then
Right.
they understand that the importance of that relationship.
Well, this is a really good segue into the next segment, which is the art of building a network. What is the most effective approach to establishing a robust professional network?
Well, the first thing I would say is that you need to recognize the difference between building a relationship and collecting contacts. So, what used to happen in the past is everyone had business cards, and you would, at the end of the night, you would have all of these cards. You can't remember who you spoke to, what they were selling, what they were talking about. But I would say that if you go in with the strategy of one, providing something for others, like giving first before you're planning to get, and the strategy of learning to listen, you will be way ahead. I think that if you come off as someone who is just looking to make a connection in order to get something or just to access someone else's community or their system, it's going to come off very insincere and people are going to put up barriers and not let you in their network. So I would say that the first thing is strive to listen, to understand the different environments. I would also say have a strategy. If you can, know who's going to be at an event before and see if there's a few people that either you may be able to help or you can listen to it and see what their needs are and see how you can help them. Definitely professional organizations like the AUA. Whenever we have either sectional meetings or if we have the large annual meeting, that is an excellent place to learn to network. I think, especially post COVID, all of us are so excited to see all of our friends and people from around the world that we haven't seen that maybe we don't take advantage of the resources as much as we could have because we are isolating ourselves with the known versus expanding our network to other people we may not have known. So I would say things like, pretty simply, when you go to a session, sit next to people you don't know. Even if there are people in the session that you didn't know, sit next to someone else. Occasionally, if you ask a question, if they ask a question, say, oh, that was a great comment, or I'd love to talk to you afterwards. I have a couple of questions about what you said or you brought up. Definitely, let's say industry partners. Industry partners have great insight. And one thing is they've seen it all. They've been to so many different departments and practices. There's a lot of other things we can learn just about urology, how it's practiced. We can learn from people who physically don't do the same thing, but they can see it from a different perspective on the outside. In addition, being on the digital platforms. So I'm not really a techie, and I would say I'm behind other people. But one thing I forced myself to do was join those platforms. So Twitter, Instagram, Slack, if you have it, Facebook. Now, it's different to be on those platforms than to be the leader who's always posting on those platforms. Even if you're not the person who wants to be out there or don't if you don't feel like you have a bunch to say, at least know what other people are saying. A lot of times you can understand what else is going on in the world and outside of our individual bubbles just by hearing about it from others. Are you on the social platforms right now or
So great question. I was very resistant, but then I wanted a better way to follow my nephews and nieces and their kids, and so that's really what got me started on Instagram, and I even have a TikTok account. Now, if you're waiting for me to post something, you're going to be having a long wait. But your point is really well taken. That just having and being on the platforms, you learn so much and so much about the world around you that if for no other reason, that's a great one to join them.
exactly? I think I referred to as Twitter. Isn't it currently X? I just want
Yes,
to make sure I have all the
it's now.
terminology
Yes.
correct. I think also that we've really moved from being as isolated as we were before, and the social networks really do help us become a lot more diverse because the the more different people that you interact with, you can see how they look and approach issues, problems, solutions in different ways. Everyone's brain's just a little bit different. And sometimes you maybe just have a thought, and when someone comes in a completely different direction, it gives you a lot of insight and it allows you to be more open to being more creative about solutions and accepting of other thoughts. I think there's no way for us to get outside of our own heads and think differently unless we hear more different thoughts. And I think that's one of the big benefits about large, diverse networks, social networking, because everyone's different age, demographic, race, industry, but also different phases of their career. And I think it's really important to get outside of your individual cohort to really understand. um, the different phases, because your obligation is to kind of network with those younger or in earlier phases of their professional development, while you network with those who are a little bit further along, so that everyone is provided benefit along the stream.
Okay, so I'd like to get some advice from you. Let's use me for an example. I'm 58 years old. Say I've never been on a digital platform. I know nothing about TikTok, Instagram, any of that. And I find that socially, I'm a little bit more introverted. Um, what advice would you give me to kind of get me started?
Sure. I think I would first create profiles on Facebook and X. And neither of those platforms require you to comment, like, subscribe, etc. So it's something that can be just view only. I would say that, especially if you are introverted, you have the option of setting up your profile that doesn't share a lot of private information. Um, Especially, you can choose usernames. It doesn't have to be your real name. You can choose Dr. X or whatever you want to be. On the back end, they will verify that you are a real person, but that gives you the ability to search for like souls, and then you can get feeds of information and understanding. If we are talking about, let's say we talk about Facebook, one easy and comfortable way is there's a lot of Facebook groups that are geared towards urology. So urologists specifically. And that can give you insight, because it'd be information that people are asking, questions, other people are responding. And it's very, very comfortable to read other people's questions thinking, I had the same thing, see the responses. And eventually, once or twice, you're just going to be like, oh, I know something about that. Let me contribute to the community also. And once you make that first step, you're going to feel so much more comfortable. But that's what I would do. Just start with the two largest platforms, and it's the safest space. Try to make yourself as anonymous as possible on creating your profile, and then just read what everyone else's thoughts are.
Yeah, and one added advantage that nobody thinks of is you get access to some really good recipes.
Yes. Okay. Perfect.
All right. Let's talk about maintaining and leveraging networks. How can you effectively nurture and utilize a thriving network?
Yes. So I would say that it actually takes work. And I think that when you put the time and effort to build your network, you do have to recognize you need to nurture that network. So once you've connected with people on a level that's a little bit more personal than just straight professional, every now and then, when you think about them, reach out, call, text, email. It can even be quick. Just, hey, you crossed my mind today, just making sure you're fine. And a lot of times people will just respond quickly, hey, doing well, thanks for thinking of me. But that nurtures, that keeps that social, that personal interaction um, alive, and helps it grow. Because what a lot of us see over time is that we haven't spoken to someone in like 3 years, and then all of a sudden they reach out. Initially, we're all excited. We're like, hey, someone thought about me. They're reaching out. But then immediately, when it's an ask for something, then you're like, they're reaching out because they just need something, not because they wanted to see how I was doing. So I would say one of the most effective and efficient ways is just every now and then, just kind of ping and say, hey, how are you doing? How are things going?
Great point. Um, let's talk about mistakes.
Okay.
Are there any networking mistakes you would caution our listeners to avoid?
Yes. Talking more than you listen. So I'm into apps now, and one of the apps that I have on my phone is one that will show in a conversation how much I'm talking versus how much I'm listening. And it's really interesting because we all like to hear ourselves talk, regardless. And I think being aware of your contribution to the conversation, and then being open that other people can contribute, is significant. No one likes just listening to someone talk and talk and talk, especially if they're not adding new information to the conversation. And so if you're always talking and not cognizant of how much others in the group are talking, it's going to be a pitfall, and people are going to try to avoid networking with you and speaking to you as frequently. It's very similar to the underlying thought of always taking and never giving. So if you are approaching a new network or you're in a social situation where you need to network, first think to give before you think to take from that network. If you don't, you will be isolated. I mean, this is a small world, even though we think it's huge. You can't really expand your network if people aren't willing to share their social capital. So I would say always give first and then consider taking.
Yeah, you hit on a concept that my friends in the business world refer to as being a generous listener.
Yes.
And that's a very interesting thing to try to conceptualize, because there is an art to listening. And I think that's another thing that I think everybody can always improve on, which will certainly help in any kind of social networking situation that you're in. So what about ethics in networking?
Yes. So the first thing I would say is that I agree. Your strategy should always be listen more than talking. But you also need to be careful of who you bring into your network. You want to make sure that you do the work to vet people who maybe not first inner ring connections, but a little bit further out, because our world is very altruistic. Our entire reason for going into this field is to give back and to make a difference, but that is not everyone. And I think we should all vet who we allow into our networks and make sure that the underlying goal is to help and improve things for other people in our network. And so that's like my main caution for ethical networking is, one, like come in to give versus just receive, and two, vet who else you want to bring into that network, especially if you don't have a deep personal or professional relationship with them, because people are trying to take advantage.
Yeah, excellent point for sure. Well, let's kind of conclude the podcast by looking into the future.
Okay.
What are your insights regarding the future of networking, and how do you think it's changing?
So it's definitely changing, and it's becoming a lot more digital and a lot more global. So as we talked about earlier, it's a very different skill set to network online versus in person. It's very different to network by email versus orally on the phone. But we need to make sure and understand that we're no longer isolated to our city, state, country. We are now globally connected. And we have to learn to appreciate different customs and cultures and how others network also, and kind of put that into our armamentarium of communication. Because if anything, the more globally diverse we are, the better we all will be in the end. I think it's also very important, and it's happening a lot, is we're learning to network outside of our comfort zone of medicine. We're learning to network with those in different industries, different fields. And it's very important because the communication style in medicine is very straightforward, direct, very altruistic. But in other industries, it's different. It's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just different. And so the more we expand outside of our comfort zone of local medicine, the more understanding we are going to have about just cultures, ideas, expansion, and the more we'll expand our own individual networks.
Great points. I think one of the things that I just realized with some of your comments is, in medicine, we can become very isolated and just focused on what we're doing. And the more we reach out, the more the world opens up to us. And that makes, as you said, everybody better. It's kind of reminds me of the Japanese philosophy of Kaizen, which is kind of constant improvement. That's what social networking, utilized the right way, can help you do.
Exactly. And I think too, when I say just networking outside of our field, other industries have networking where it's like meetups and newsletters and other connections. And I don't know that we in medicine take advantage of it as much. I mean, there's a lot of burnout and fatigue, there's a lot of pressures on us. But I think reaching out and going to events that are not medically related sometimes will help make us a lot more comfortable and definitely expand our network.
That's a great point, that I think social networking can actually probably help treat burnout, which, as everybody knows, is very prevalent, especially in urology. But it's a really good tool to help try to modify those risk factors for burnout.
Exactly, I agree.
Dr. Miles Thomas, have we missed anything?
No, I think we gave our listeners a pretty good overview on the benefits of networking. It's no longer as scary. We given them some great insights of just a process that they can use in order to network a little bit more frequently and a little bit with more strategy, and focusing on giving before you receive, as well as the importance of listening.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for sharing your time and expertise with us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
And thank you to our audience for joining us on the AUA Leadership and Business Podcast.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, make AUA Leadership in Business your go-to podcast. Subscribe today by searching AUA Leadership in Business on your favorite podcast app and enhance your leadership and business education needs.